They always say, do not take work home with you. But when your work has the power to collapse a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure in under 15 minutes, well, it tends to follow you whether you like it or not. My name is Sierra Langston. I am 38 years old, born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, and until very recently, I was the Senior Systems Reliability Engineer at Voltasec Corporation, a cybersecurity firm based in San Jose. If you have ever wired money across states, transferred business funds overseas, or processed a payroll through a secure gateway, chances are my work kept your transactions alive. My job was not glamorous. I was not on stage giving TED Talks or pitching at board meetings, but I was the reason our system stayed online, even when everything else went wrong. It all started on a Friday night, the kind of night where you should be sipping wine and ignoring Slack notifications. But there I was, in my kitchen, hoodie on, hair tied back, laptop open beside a half-finished coffee. A deployment flag popped up on my screen. Op Sweep V7. Just another tag, right? Wrong. This one slipped through the backup control repository, the most heavily locked down segment of our codebase. And it was using elevated credentials. Mine. That was the first red flag. The second came when I opened the commit logs and saw what the changes actually did. My multi-factor failover protocol, the one I built, tested, and locked with a personal cert chain, was gone. Stripped out like it had never mattered. Someone went in, removed the heartbeat detection layer, bypassed the cascading handshake mechanism, and replaced it with a dumb auto redirect. I froze. That protocol was not some legacy leftover. It was a dead man's switch. I buried it deep for a reason. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage. I knew exactly what this meant. This was not a mistake. Nobody accidentally deletes 6 layers of encrypted fallback logic. This was deliberate. Someone wanted the backup system to fail silently, and they wanted it to look like just another streamlining effort. The timing made it worse. It was pushed at 7:42 p.m. on a Friday, a classic dump and run. Whoever did it was hoping no one would notice until after the weekend. But I noticed, because I always notice. I was the one who stayed late to run dry tests, the one who built simulated outages just to watch the system recover in chaos. That paranoia was not a quirk, it was my superpower. I started digging deeper. Audit logs, deployment approvals, IP access histories, and every breadcrumb led back to a name that made my stomach turn. Nolan Richter, the new Chief Operations Officer, a man with a resume full of buzzwords and a reputation for slashing infrastructure budgets like a chef on a cooking show. He had only been with Voltasec for 3 weeks, and already he was treating the entire SRE division like a relic. This was not just code cleanup. This was sabotage masquerading as modernization. And somehow, he was using my admin access to do it. That part stung more than I want to admit, because I trusted the system we built. I trusted the people around it. I never thought I would have to defend my own work from someone inside the same company. I sat there for hours, replaying the sequence in my head. I remembered all the conversations where I had warned management that the backup logic needed manual intervention, that it should never be fully automated. I had built in a trigger, a hidden manual override that required my physical presence and a signature key file locked in an air-gapped vault. It was the kind of thing that seemed excessive, until it was not. And now, with that layer removed, there was nothing stopping a full system crash if the live servers failed. No rollback, no mirror restore, just darkness. I knew what was coming, and I knew they would not believe me until it was too late. But I was not just angry, I was hurt. After 8 years of loyal work, of weekends lost, of family birthdays skipped for 3 a.m. patch deployments, this was how they repaid me? By erasing my safeguards and pretending they were obsolete? By rewriting my legacy into something they could toss out with the office coffee filters? I was not about to let that slide. Not quietly, anyway. This was not just about code anymore. This was personal. Someone wanted to erase me from the company's future. But what they forgot, what they always forget, is that I built the past they are standing on, and I buried more than one secret in that infrastructure. Secrets that only I could wake. People love to throw around the word legacy like it is a bad thing. In tech, it has almost become a slur. Code that is too old to be useful, systems too slow to keep up, ideas that belong in some museum of outdated engineering. But at Voltasec Corp, where we handled high-frequency transactions between federal clients, Fortune 500s, and cross-border trading platforms, the only thing worse than legacy code was no code at all. A system hiccup here did not just cause an annoying pop-up. It could mean $40 million locked in limbo or a government audit triggered by a single missed reconciliation. Glitches were not inconvenient. They were catastrophic. And for 5 long years, I made damn sure they never happened. I had poured my life into that backup system. Every layer, every script, every failover protocol. It all came from those late nights staring at terminal windows, double-checking logic chains, and preparing for the kind of disaster most people could not even imagine. The world sees software as fast, fluid, and disposable. But real infrastructure, the stuff that keeps international payment systems alive through blackouts, DDoS attacks, or third-party breaches, that is slow, methodical, and built on the backs of cautious engineers who understand one simple rule: everything breaks eventually. My job was to make sure nothing stayed broken. I did not just rely on cloud backups or automated snapshots. No, I designed something stronger, something smarter, a hybrid system that required what I called a digital handshake. It could not trigger on its own. It needed 2 things: an active server environment and my private cert file embedded in an encrypted payload. Without both, the entire restore tree remained locked. That was not a flaw. That was the design. Because full automation sounds beautiful on paper, until the day you need a human judgment call and the system cannot think for itself. I never believed in leaving mission-critical decisions entirely to machines. And just in case all else failed, I built what I called the Last Light Protocol. It was not part of the official documentation. Only 2 people in the company even knew it existed, and one of them had retired last year. Last Light was my final insurance policy, a hidden kill switch that could reinitialize a core network restore using an offline trigger. No cloud access, no corporate override, just me, my secure vault drive, and a script that could rebuild a system from dust. It was buried so deep in the infrastructure that you would have to know exactly where to look, and even then, you could not activate it without my biometric encryption. Some people might call that paranoid. I called it peace of mind. You would think a system like that would be celebrated, but people like Nolan Richter did not see value in systems they could not understand. He looked at my architecture and saw complexity, friction, and cost. What he could not see was the history behind every decision, the recovered near crashes, the failed patch nights that never became headlines because my safety nets caught the fall. Legacy, to him, meant disposable. To me, it meant tested, trusted, battle-hardened. It was a blueprint built from the worst-case scenarios no one else wanted to think about. The truth is, I never set out to be a gatekeeper. I did not build Last Light because I thought I was the smartest person in the room. I built it because I knew I was not, because teams change, because vendors fail, because there will always be someone who decides to cut corners to hit a quarterly number. And when that day comes, and it always does, I wanted there to be something left to save. I wanted a way to bring everything back, even if I was not around to see it. That was not arrogance. That was responsibility. So when I saw Nolan's deployment overwrite that digital handshake and pull my cert hooks out of the chain, I did not just see a threat to the system. I saw a threat to everything I had built. Every sleepless night, every red-eye trip to a data center in Phoenix, every customer call I took at 3 a.m. to walk them through a failover. All of it, wiped out with a few lines of careless code and a smug belief that legacy engineers like me were just too slow to evolve. I knew then that this was not just about job titles or systems architecture. This was war, and Nolan had no idea what kind of bomb he had just tripped. By the time most people were home eating dinner or binge-watching some streaming series, I was still at my desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked on my screen like it owed me answers. The commit logs were a mess of timestamps and branches, but I knew how to read chaos. Every system leaves fingerprints. Code may lie, but metadata does not. I traced the deployment that yanked out my failover triggers back to one temporary admin account, granted just 2 weeks ago, and already used more times than our entire SRE team combined. It was labeled N. Richter Temp, and my jaw tightened as the pieces began to fall into place. Nolan Richter, the brand new Chief Operations Officer, had gone poking around where he did not belong. He was a Harvard man, and you could tell from the moment he walked into the building. Polished shoes, blazer too expensive for our kind of work, the kind of guy who dropped phrases like cloud native pivoting or scalable lean disruption in every meeting. He was not a builder, he was a trimmer someone hired to cut what he did not understand, so the board could see a few more digits on the balance sheet. When he first joined Voltasek, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone deserves a learning curve, but it was clear from day one that Nolan was not interested in learning. He was interested in erasing. The worst part? He actually believed he was making things better. In his mind, anything older than 2 years was bloat. If it did not fit neatly into a dashboard with real-time metrics and an AI logo slapped on top, it was obsolete. He looked at my backup system and saw a legacy burden. He called it that to my face in a team call. I remember gripping the edge of my desk so hard my fingers went numb. I wanted to ask him how many system outages he had recovered from using nothing but a shell console and a flashlight at 2 a.m., but I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet until now. I sat alone that night staring at the damage he had done. I ran simulations using the new parameters he pushed. They failed, every time. With the multi-factor handshake removed and my cert hooks bypassed, the system defaulted to a single-path restore that was doomed the second any one node went dark. It was the equivalent of building a fire escape and locking it from the outside. And yet, because it was cleaner on a flowchart, Nolan saw it as progress. He had no idea what he was cutting. He was taking a knife to a pressure valve without understanding what pressure even was. I began collecting evidence, screenshots, hash logs, system diffs. I opened a secure folder on my private drive and labeled it contingency. I knew how this worked. If I pushed back too hard, I would be labeled difficult. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit. So I chose the third option prepared. I documented every single change he made, every instance where he used elevated privileges without a review or test run. I flagged the commits with my own annotations and uploaded copies to an encrypted vault I controlled off-network, just in case, because when the day came and I knew it would, I wanted a clean trail from fire to arsonist. Still, part of me hoped I was wrong. Maybe it was a test build. Maybe someone pushed the wrong branch. Maybe Nolan was just green and trying to prove something. But as I dug deeper, those maybes disappeared. The commit message was clear: streamlining redundancy logic, removing legacy fallback, no ticket, no peer review, no rollback plan. It was not a test, it was an execution. And my work, my system, was the target. But here's the thing about legacy code: it has memory. And so do the people who built it. I closed my laptop that night with a pit in my stomach. Not because I was scared of Nolan. No, I had handled scarier threats buried in corrupted backups and failed RAID arrays. I was uneasy because I knew how fragile corporate memory could be. I knew how quickly years of careful design could be wiped away by one person with just enough power and zero context. But I was not going to let him bury me under his buzzwords. Resilience is not bloat. Caution is not inefficiency. I had worked too hard, built too much to stand by while someone like him gambled with everything. He left fingerprints on my system. Now I was going to leave a trail of my own. Monday morning came with a sharp chill in the air and a knot in my gut that would not go away. I walked into the office with a purpose, clutching the printouts from the commit logs like they were courtroom evidence. I had not slept much that weekend, not after what I saw in the code. Every simulation I ran told the same story. The safety net was gone, and no one seemed to care. So I went straight to Nolan's corner office, knocked once, and stepped in before he could tell me not to. I was calm, measured. I showed him the removed dependencies, laid out the broken logic tree, and even offered to walk him through the cascading failure that would happen if a single storage node went down. But he just smiled at me like I was a little girl warning a bulldozer not to hit the gas. "Sierra?" he said with that smug tilt to his voice. "This is the new Voltasek. We automate. We trim fat. Your old setup? It's over-engineered and out." Then he waved me off like I was someone handing out flyers on the street. I stood there stunned not just by the arrogance but by the recklessness. He genuinely thought he had improved the system, like removing a seatbelt because the car had good brakes. I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked out, jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. I had seen a lot of stupidity in my career, but this was a new breed, a dangerous one. The thing that haunted me most was not the technical flaw, it was the culture behind it. Nolan was not acting alone. He was operating with board approval, senior leadership backing, and a team of yes men who confused minimalism with innovation. They thought legacy systems were a liability, not an asset. They valued speed over safety, shiny dashboards over tested logic, and no one wanted to be the person in the meeting who said, "This might break." That person was labeled negative, resistant, a blocker. And that was exactly what Nolan saw in me now. I remember walking back to my desk, staring at the floor, thinking, so this is how it happens. Not with sirens or alarms, but with a smile and a buzzword. This was not just about code. It was about erasure. Erasing everything I had built. Everything that had protected the company through ransomware scares, faulty deployments, and a power grid failure that nearly wiped out 2 years of financial records. My systems had caught it all, quietly, without drama, without applause. But now they were being unhooked, one thread at a time, by someone who had never spent a minute in the trenches. I wanted to believe he could still be reasoned with, that if I just showed him one more simulation, one more comparison chart, he would finally see what I saw. But his mind was made up. The decision had already been pitched to the board as operational streamlining. Any rollback now would make him look weak, and men like Nolan Richter would rather burn the house down than admit they lit the wrong fuse. I could see it in his eyes, that mix of superiority and insecurity. He was not looking at a problem. He was looking at an obstacle. So I changed tactics. I documented everything, every deleted line, every new dependency he pushed without regression testing. I opened a secure bug ticket and labeled it Critical Priority, Backup Failure Cascade. I attached the logs, my findings, and a direct recommendation for a 48-hour rollback. Then I flagged it to Ellen Ward, Senior Director of Infrastructure, and the only executive left with actual engineering experience. I knew it was a long shot, but I also knew she respected data, and if I had anything left to stand on, it was the raw math of disaster. By the time I clicked send, I already knew how it would go. Nolan's team would intercept it, slap a non-blocking for launch label on it, and bury it beneath a pile of Jira tickets no one would ever read. But that was not the point. I was not writing it for them. I was writing it for the record. Because when this thing crashed, and it would, I wanted someone, anyone, to know that it was not an accident. It was not unforeseen. It was not fate. It was a choice. A calculated, reckless, avoidable choice, and I had tried to stop it. I knew better than to yell into a void. Arguing with Nolan would only feed his narrative that I was emotional, resistant to change, too close to the system. I had heard it all before, so instead I went silent, focused. My hands shook as I typed, but not from fear, from purpose. I opened a clean document, gave it a header internal incident flag Voltasec Crit 4L40, and began laying out the failures line by line. Every deleted dependency, every missing validation step, every broken logic chain was presented with clinical precision. No emotion, just facts, because facts carry weight. And when everything finally fell apart, I wanted the paper trail to be undeniable. I included side-by-side comparisons of the system before and after Nolan's changes. Redline diffs, trigger maps, simulation logs showing recovery failures under stress conditions. Then I added a digital signature and a timestamp hash so they could not claim it was faked or altered later. At the end of the document, I attached a SHA-25D6 key linked directly to my Last Light protocol, the buried kill switch I had quietly built into the backup framework 2 years ago. It was my insurance policy, my one final safeguard if everything else failed. And now, for the first time, someone besides me would know it existed. I encrypted the document and sent it to Clara Wen, the only board-level executive who still understood that engineering was not just a cost center. She had come up through the systems side years ago before climbing the corporate ladder, and though we had never worked directly together, I had seen her step in to protect critical teams during budget slashes more than once. She was sharp, quiet, and not easily manipulated. If anyone on that board still listened when someone in ops screamed fire, it was Clara. The subject line on the email read, "Urgent. Risk of irreversible backup failure. Requesting temporary hold." I flagged it high priority and sent it straight to her private account. Then I waited, Every minute that passed felt heavier than the last. I refreshed my inbox every 10 seconds. Nothing. An hour later, I checked the ticket status in Jira. Closed. No comment. No follow-up. No review logs. Just a soft corporate tombstone. Resolved, not blocking for launch. That was it. My entire memo buried like an inconvenient truth. I stared at that screen for a long time, wondering which of Nolan's minions had the nerve to shut it down without reading a single word. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I considered rewriting the ticket under a new label, escalating to security, blasting it wide to every senior manager on the chain. But then I stopped, because I realized something they did not want to know. They had already made their choice. Streamlining was the brand now. Failure was acceptable as long as it was someone else's fault. I could feel the walls tightening around me. I was no longer an asset. I was a liability, a reminder of the system they were so desperate to leave behind. And yet, even as they pushed me out, they still depended on the bones of the thing I built. They just had no idea what they were standing on, or how fast it could all collapse. So I did the only thing left to do. I made peace with the fact that I might not be there when it broke. I copied the entire CRET 440 memo to an off-network drive and locked it with dual authentication. One key was stored locally, the other was embedded inside the Last Light protocol, activated only through my kill switch cert. No one else could touch it. No one else even knew it existed. And when the time came, if it ever came, I would be ready. There is a strange kind of calm that comes from knowing the truth, even if no one believes you. I was not going to beg for someone to listen. I had already warned them. Quietly, thoroughly, professionally. What they chose to do with that warning was on them. But deep down, I already knew how this story would end. They thought I was being dramatic, paranoid, too protective of legacy systems. They did not realize I was the last safety net, and once they cut me out, there would be no one left to catch them when the system fell. Wednesday morning felt off before I even stepped inside. The air had that too quiet stillness, like the moments before a storm rolls through. I walked up to the front entrance of Voltasec, reached for my badge like I had done hundreds of times before, and pressed it to the scanner. Nothing. I tried again, still nothing. A soft red light blinked back at me, quiet but final. Security, the same two guys who used to nod and joke with me every day, looked away awkwardly and then handed me a sealed manila envelope. I opened it with a sinking feeling in my gut before I even read the words. Position eliminated due to department consolidation. No meeting, no warning, no explanation beyond that sterile phrase. I stood there for a long second, holding the envelope like it might explain something more if I stared hard enough. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Did Clara Wen approve this? One of the guards, Jared, the older one with a military buzz cut, looked genuinely uncomfortable. He said quietly, "All we know is your access was revoked this morning. HR said you'll be contacted." That was it. Just like that, 5 years of service, erased with a printed form letter and a badge that no longer worked. I walked out into the parking lot with the envelope tucked under my arm and my breath fogging in the cold morning air, wondering if anyone would even notice I was gone. Later that day, I found out the truth. Clara never got my message. Her assistant, Kira, one of those aggressively polished MBA types, had filtered the email and flagged it as low-priority workflow commentary. She closed the CRET 440 ticket in Jira with a dismissive one-liner. No escalation needed, appears to be internal noise from deprecated processes. And that was it. No one forwarded it, no one read it, no one asked a single question. I had not been fired because I failed. I had been fired because I spoke up, because I challenged the narrative, because I documented something they wanted to bury. The worst part was not even the dismissal. It was the casual way it was handled, like I was just a checkbox, a budget line, a relic from the old guard who was now too inconvenient to keep around. They stripped me of access, walked me out, and had someone else pack up my desk. I never even got to say goodbye to my team, not that many of them were left. Most of the real engineers had either burned out or been reassigned when Nolan took over. What remained was a thin layer of overconfident generalists who believed anything older than 2 years was obsolete. They had no idea what they were doing, and no one above them cared. I spent the afternoon on my porch, laptop open, staring at the CRET 440 memo saved to my personal encrypted drive. My finger hovered over the delete key more than once. But I could not do it, because I knew what was coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next week, but it would come. They had gutted the one thing keeping their entire infrastructure resilient, and they did not even realize they had done it. I had built a system that could survive power loss, malware injection, simultaneous node failure, and now they had cut it off at the knees. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and went through the steps to revoke my kill switch cert from the Voltasec registry. Quietly, permanently. It was not sabotage. It was my property, my protocol, my cert, and I was no longer employed there. Without that digital handshake, the backup logic tree would not recognize any restore command. The last light protocol would remain dormant unless manually triggered by me, and only me. That was the point. I had tried to warn them. They chose not to listen, and now they would live with that choice. What stung the most was not the betrayal. It was the realization that I had been right the whole time. They did not value resilience. They did not value foresight. They valued control, perception, and speed. And when those things came crashing down, it would not be because of bad luck or random failure. It would be because they silenced the only person who could have stopped it. Sunday, 2:00 a.m. sharp. That was when Voltasec flipped the switch. OpsSweep v7 went live, quietly deployed under the cover of weekend silence while most of the company slept. I was already awake, not because I expected it, but because something deep in my bones would not let me rest. A kind of sixth sense only engineers understand. The kind that whispers, they didn't listen, now it begins. I was sitting on my couch with a cold cup of tea, laptop open, when I saw the first ping through a back-channel monitoring alert that was still, somehow, connected to my personal watch list. Tier 2 nodes deadlocked. The message was clean, brutal, and final. Critical. DB, lock T2, no replication detected. 14 minutes. That was all it took. 14 minutes from deployment to disaster. The automated recovery engine kicked in like it was supposed to, but it hit a wall. The handshake logic, the very protocol I had warned about, was gone, stripped out like scrap wiring. Without it, the backup mirrors could not verify or sync with active nodes. The system reached for the ghost backups I had marked obsolete 2 years ago. Backups that were never meant to go live, just decoys for load tests and failover simulations. It tried to restore from one of them. Failed, then failed again and again. Each time it looped, it dug the hole deeper. 5 minutes later, it got worse. The transaction logs collapsed. With no valid restore point and no verified audit trail, the system's digital ledger, our core record of client-side financial entries, flatlined. Entire blocks of data disappeared into the void. It was like watching a dam burst from a cracked foundation. By 2:23 a.m., a full cascade had begun. API layers broke first, then internal routing queues, then downstream verification clusters. There was no firewall issue, no attack vector. This was not an intrusion. It was rot from the inside. A slow, preventable failure turned lethal by arrogance. I was not celebrating. I want to make that clear. This was not the revenge I wanted. It was the vindication I never asked for. Still, I sat there, watching the digital lights go out one by one on my personal node monitor, feeling every byte die like a breath being held too long. When Tier 0 faulted the root ledger, the backbone of Voltasec's financial vaults, that was when I knew they were finished. That ledger required triple sign authentication to recover, and none of the recovery signatures could verify without the last light protocol. My cert file was offline, untouchable, and without it, they were locked out of their own infrastructure. Around 2:30, the alert silence broke. Someone tried to ping me through an old secure channel. I ignored it. 3 missed calls from a Voltasec number followed, then a 4th unlisted. I let them ring. They were not ready to talk to me on Friday. They made their decision. They pushed me out and tore apart a system they barely understood. Now they wanted help? No, not yet. I needed them to feel it, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Sometimes the only way to make executives understand consequence is to let them hold it in their hands while it burns. By 3 a.m., Voltasec had lost full access to their client transaction network. Emergency escalation protocols had failed. Board members were waking up to blinking phones and unreadable dashboards. Clients on the East Coast were already sending emails asking why their balance sheets showed zeros or locked transfers. No one could answer them. No one even knew how deep the damage went yet. All I knew was it had started exactly as I warned, exactly as I wrote in Crit 440, and exactly 14 minutes after the moment they believed they no longer needed me. The truth is, systems do not crash from one mistake. They crash from 1,000 ignored warnings. I did not write that memo to scare anyone. I wrote it to prevent this, but they buried it. They closed it like it was noise. Now the noise had become a scream, and no one left inside knew how to make it stop. By sunrise, the IT war room at Voltasek looked more like a crime scene than a command center. They tried everything: rollback scripts, cross-regional failover, emergency snapshots, even cloud retrieval tools that were only meant for non-production sandboxes, but nothing stuck. Every system they touched unraveled a little more, like pulling a thread on a sweater until the whole thing collapsed. The truth was brutal and simple. They had deleted the only keys that mattered. The backups were ghosts, the triggers were void, and by noon, customer data was unrecoverable. Entire portfolios vanished into error logs. Transactions failed mid-pipeline. Some clients had already called their lawyers. Others had started reaching out to the media. Then came the knock at the door. Not metaphorically, I mean literally, government regulators showed up. The Office of Financial Systems Oversight, along with a digital forensic team from the State Compliance Bureau. That was when panic finally bloomed at the board level. It was no longer just a technical failure, it was now a legal one, with teeth. Everyone in that building knew what it meant to have no audit trail in a system like Voltasek's. We were not talking about delays. We were talking about billions in unrecoverable assets, suspicious data anomalies, and possible fraud investigations. That was when Clara Wen finally saw it. The memo I had sent and her assistant had buried. Clara always struck me as sharp, even when I disagreed with her decisions. She did not waste time blaming anyone. She did what good leaders do. She read the memo, followed the hash key to the kill switch cert signature, and realized exactly what they had lost. She saw that I had warned them before this firestorm ever started, and she also saw what no one else wanted to admit, that I was the only person who could still reverse it. At 12:43 p.m., my phone lit up with her name. I did not answer right away. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to let it go to voicemail. But something in me knew she would not beg unless she meant it. When I picked up, her voice was quiet, measured. "Sierra," she said, "I need your help. You were right. We need you back." I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel how much weight those words carried. Then I answered, calm and cool. "You do not just need me back. You need to fix what let this happen in the first place?" She did not argue. She just said, "Tell me what you want." And that was the moment I knew the power had shifted. I told her we would not talk terms on the phone. I wanted a formal email with full board visibility. I wanted written acknowledgement of my original design, the last light protocol, and a statement that Crit 440 had been mishandled internally without review. I wanted direct reporting authority as an external consultant, total autonomy over the rebuild, and triple my former rate. And I wanted Nolan Richter fired. That was non-negotiable. Clara took a breath and said, "Give me an hour." I gave her 30 minutes. It took 24, not minutes, hours. During that time, Voltasek bled out in public. Word got out that their core ledger had crashed. Stock price dipped, then plummeted. Clients froze contracts, and Clara delivered. Everything I asked for, in writing, with digital signatures and timestamps from the entire executive board. She even offered to throw in back pay for the last 2 weeks. I ignored that part. I was not coming back for a paycheck. I was coming back because I built that system with care, and I refused to let it rot under the boots of people who only saw it as legacy bloat. By 1 a.m. Monday, I walked into Voltasek again, this time through the executive entrance. Badge reissued, credentials restored, my name reinstated in the root access table. The lights were dim, the office was quiet, but every hallway felt different. Like they finally understood what had been holding them up all along. Not automation, not efficiency, not flashy titles, just the invisible architecture of trust built by someone who cared enough to think 3 steps ahead. Now I was back, and this time I was not playing nice. I did not blink, hesitate, or soften the edges. I knew what my system was worth now, and more importantly, I knew what they had risked by pretending it was expendable. So when Clara asked what it would take for me to come back, I gave her 3 simple, non-negotiable conditions. First, I wanted a company-wide internal email authored and signed by Clara herself, acknowledging my role as the lead architect of Voltasec's backup and disaster recovery infrastructure. No vague engineering team credit. I wanted my name front and center. I wanted every single person who had rolled their eyes when I spoke up in meetings to read it and remember. Legacy is not dead code. It is the reason they had anything left to rebuild. Second, I wanted Nolan Richter gone, not later, not after an internal review. I wanted a clean, immediate, documented termination. I did not care if they called it restructuring or mutual separation. I just wanted him out of the building, with badge access revoked and no more power to meddle with what he did not understand. And third, I wanted a formal consulting agreement, 3 months, triple my old salary, full access, full autonomy, and immunity from NDAs tied to this failure. If I was going to rescue their reputation, I was not going to let them spin the narrative afterward without my voice. Clara did not argue. She did not drag in lawyers or try to haggle. She paused, confirmed each condition clearly, and said, "You will have everything in writing within the hour." It took her 9 minutes. 9 minutes to undo what Nolan had destroyed over 9 weeks. The moment the documents arrived, I reviewed every line like I was auditing nuclear launch codes. Everything checked out. So I grabbed my laptop, authenticated into the secure shell, and ran a signature validation check. 1 file, 1 keystroke. The last light protocol. When I hit enter, the kill switch sequence began its cycle. Not a bomb, not a wipeout, this was restoration. Like reviving a heartbeat after flatlining. Last Light bypassed the broken deployment path and redirected to a cold vault I had hidden under obfuscated encryption deep in Voltasec's disconnected cluster. Nobody had known about it. Not even Clara. The protocol contained verified ledger snapshots from 48 hours before the crash, complete with reconciled hashes, multi-signature key trails, and validated transaction maps. It was slow, deliberate, and absolutely bulletproof. As the system rehydrated itself, I sat in the dark with my coffee and watched the heartbeat logs return. One by one, core ledger, green. Customer vaults, green. Internal routing, yellow, then green. It took nearly 6 hours, but when the final node synced, I ran a validation checksum across all recovery endpoints. No corruption, no data loss. Everything was intact. I had done what Nolan said was redundant. I had made sure Voltasec could survive the kind of disaster they created with their own arrogance. The board was still scrambling, media teams prepping statements, compliance officers trying to freeze the narrative. But inside the system, everything was calm again. Stable. I left a message in the syslog header. Resilience is not a luxury. It is your last line of truth. I signed it the way I always did, built by S. Wyatt. By the time employees started trickling into the office Monday morning, most of them still had no idea how close they had come to total annihilation. Their dashboards loaded, their accounts synced, their customer tickets cleared, and maybe they would never fully understand what happened while they were asleep. But Clara did, the board did, and I sure as hell did. I was not back for glory. I was back to remind them that some systems only survive because one person refused to cut corners. And this time, I was not going to fade back into the shadows. I had my contract, my voice, and my name attached to every line of logic I had written. I was not just rebuilding Voltasec, I was rewriting the rules. The system limped at first, crawling out of the digital grave it had been shoved into by people who never respected what kept it alive in the first place. Recovery is never graceful. It is not a single flip of a switch, it is one heartbeat at a time. I watched every log file refresh, every system call stabilize, every node blink back from the abyss over the course of 36 hours. My last light protocol, the same one Nolan Richter mocked as legacy excess, was now the only reason Voltasec still had a heartbeat. Every restored byte was a slap in the face to his blind ambition. True to her word, Clara made it official. A company-wide announcement went out from her desk. Nolan Richter was terminated for cause, cited for unauthorized override of critical infrastructure safeguards and neglect of engineering risk analysis. No golden parachute, no polite spin, just a swift, clean break. His name was scrubbed from the change logs, the deployment approvals, even the DevOps chain. It was as if he had never touched the system, but the damage he caused was recorded, cataloged, and reviewed in every post-mortem Voltasec would run for the next 10 years. Let that be his legacy. As for me, I never stepped foot in that building again. I did not need to. They gave me a secure shell, consultant access, full privileges, and one simple job. Make sure this never happens again. But I had already done my part. The system did not need me to babysit it anymore. It needed the people in charge to finally learn what I had known all along, that resilience is not about being flashy or fast or filled with buzzwords. It is about being deliberate, cautious, and unshakably stubborn when it matters most. Still, I left them something, a reminder. I embedded it quietly in the new system's footer, right where only engineers would notice, the place most execs would never bother to look. A simple line of code. No one has dared touch it. They all know what it means now. It is not decoration. It is a monument. Engineers pass it on like folklore. Do not delete that line. That is the code that saved everything. Some say it with reverence, others with guilt. Either way, it stays, and that is all I ever wanted. I got my payout, more than I had ever made in a year, stuffed into a 3-month consulting package. I used it to launch a small security architecture firm out of Tacoma. Just me and a few trusted ex-colleagues who still believe that good code is quiet and brilliant systems are often invisible until they are the only thing left standing. We do not chase funding. We do not market ourselves at conferences. We take on projects where trust is broken, and we build systems that cannot be steamrolled by politics or ignorance. Every now and then, I get an email from someone still inside Voltasec. They ask for advice, or thank me, or quietly forward a memo about a new initiative that smells a little too much like old mistakes. I never reply directly. I just read, sigh, and smile. The cycle never ends, but at least now they know what a real fail-safe looks like. It wears no cape. It just quietly waits ready, stable, and patient for the day it is needed. I am not bitter anymore. What happened was inevitable in a company that let ambition outrun wisdom. But I am not forgiving either. I earned my peace the hard way, line by line, protocol by protocol, in systems built to survive idiots and egos. And they learned the price of ignoring the one person who knew where every wire was buried. So no, I did not burn them down. I built the extinguisher and walked away before they lit the match. And when they finally reached for it, desperate, panicked, humbled, I let them use it. That is not revenge. That is reckoning. That is legacy.